All right, here is The Treasure of Pelican Cove. Now, I love this book, and it is so much fun to read together in person because it's kind of a mystery. So I'm only going to read it in sections like we would if we were together in class, so there's a bit of the suspense. And then I'll show you the workbook pages that we're doing, but what you're going to need, this is for day 1. This is the packet that we are using for all of these workbook pages. Okay, and you're gonna hang on to this packet until the very last day we are done with the chapter. So, The Treasure of Pelican Cove, and today we are reading chapter 1. Today is Tuesday the 12th, and we are reading chapter 1. Land's End, here we come. Jimmy walked with a bounce, up and down, up and down. At the top of each bounce, he looked around the airport. I'll be the first to see Granny this time, he thought. Stop bouncing, Jimmy, Elizabeth Ann whispered. You look like a slap-happy frog. No, I don't, Jimmy said. He kept on bouncing. Mama had said to obey Elizabeth Ann on the plane. She hadn't said anything about obeying her at the airport. Jimmy, Paul grabbed at Jimmy's flapping shirt tail. Jimmy dodged and quickly bounced away. Elizabeth Ann might fuss and leave it at that. Paul wouldn't. Jimmy got in one last bounce before Paul jerked him down. There she is, Jimmy yelled. Granny, Granny, over here. The other passengers grinned. They moved aside as Jimmy made a beeline for a gray-haired lady. He dragged Paul along behind him. Elizabeth Ann followed, her face pink with embarrassment. Jimmy! Granny gave the freckled-faced boy a big hug. And Paul, careful there, she said, as Paul let go of Jimmy's shirt and stumbled into her. Sorry, Gran, Paul said, righting himself. Jimmy got away from me. I saw, Granny said. In a hurry to get to Land's End, aren't you, Jimmy? Yes'm, Jimmy said, beaming. Is Blackie okay? Did he miss me? Did he like the bone I sent him for Christmas? Oh, Blackie's just fine for a dog his age, Granny said. And yes, I'm sure he'll remember you. Just don't forget that Blackie is no spring chicken. Jimmy stopped and looked puzzled. Well, he's not a chicken at all, Granny. That just means he's getting old, Paul said, rubbing Jimmy's hair. Jimmy wiggled away. Well, I knew that. Here, Elizabeth Ann, Granny said. She held out both hands. Let me look at you. Elizabeth Ann stood still. My, you've become quite a lady, Granny said. Her eyes misted. You look just like your mother did at your age. Jimmy stared at Elizabeth Ann. He frowned. She looked just like Elizabeth Ann. He opened his mouth to say so, and Paul stuck an elbow in his ribs. Ow, Jimmy grunted. Is Hiram still at Land's End? Paul asked. Still there, Granny said, and still just as stubborn as ever. Paul grinned. Hiram was a good caretaker, but he had a mind of his own. He and Granny disagreed on just about everything, except his work. His work was better than anyone else's on the island. Granny couldn't fire him if she wanted to, and luckily she didn't want to. I'm glad, Jimmy said. I like Hiram. So do I, son, Granny said. Couldn't get along without him. But sometimes, well, some things are better just left unsaid. She took them out to get their bags, then they followed her outside. She stopped beside a faded pickup truck. Had to borrow Hiram's pickup, Granny explained to the kids. The car is in the shop. Granny climbed into the front seat and slid neatly behind the wheel. The children squeezed in beside her as best as they could. Granny handed her big black purse to Elizabeth Ann, and she settled her hat firmly on her head and smoothed her gloves onto her hands. The children quickly buckled their seatbelts as she reached for the stick shift. Hold on, Granny yelled as the motor roared. It settled into a steady rumble, and the pickup truck lurched once as Granny backed out of the parking space. She eased into the line of moving traffic. Jimmy hung his head out the window and licked at the air. Salt air, he yelled. Paul yanked him back in. Sit still, Jimmy, and don't bother Granny. Oh, he's not bothering me, Paul, Granny shouted. This truck of Hiram's could find its way home on a dark night. Jimmy looked at Paul confused. She just means that they drive this way a lot, Paul said. Hold on. The three children braced themselves for the ride across the causeway. On the other side was the island where Land's End had been built. They rumbled along close to the speed limit without meeting many cars. After a while, the children got used to the noise of the old truck and they began to look around. "Look, Gran," Elizabeth Ann said, "a t-shirt shop." "Well, that's new." "So's that," Granny said, sniffing. She pointed to an area on the right. They were passing the public beach. Pelicans covered the breakwater below Fisherman's Restaurant, and the children were puzzled for a moment, wondering what she meant. The pelicans had always been there, hunting for handouts. Then, down past the restaurant, the children saw brightly painted sheds and wheels. "An amusement park," Jimmy shouted. "Can we stop? Can we?" "No, siree," Granny said. She shifted gears and turned down the road that ran alongside the beach. "It's a tourist trap. Nothing but a tourist trap." The children looked back wistfully. The bright colors were hidden by the green fronds of palm trees. They all sighed in unison. Granny glanced at them. "Well, maybe, but I'm not promising." "Thanks, Gran," they replied. They watched the road eagerly as the houses grew fewer and fewer. For a while, they could see nothing but sea grape, crepe myrtle, and sea oats. Then they saw the cluster of palms and live oaks that surrounded the house called Land's End. "Here it is," Elizabeth Ann said. She leaned against the seat belt to get a better look. The house was old, but it was neat and freshly painted. Wide steps led past the latticed ground floor to the front porch that overlooked the ocean. Its 2 stories reached almost to the top of the live oak trees. On the roof was a neat widow's walk. Granny slowed down to turn into the driveway made of crushed shells and stepped on the gas. The shells sputtered from under the tires. An old man was watering the flowers beside the lattice. He jumped back wildly and dropped the hose. "Now look at that," Granny muttered. She stopped the truck called to Hiram. "You know better than that. You've been here 20 years and I haven't ran over you yet." He looked at her blankly. Then he cupped his hand behind his ear. "What?" Granny stopped the motor. "That man," she said. "Don't know why I keep him on." She stepped down on the driveway, still talking to herself. Elizabeth Ann and Paul grinned at each other. Even Granny knew that Hiram was teasing her, but she'd enjoy a joke as much as he did. The caretaker hugged the children in turn. His eyes were sparkling underneath the white eyebrows. "I got her that time, didn't I?" "Hiram," Elizabeth Ann grinned, "you shouldn't tease Granny." "A person has to have some fun," Hiram said. "Now you 3 are here, your Granny can have some peace. Run and stow your gear now, and I'll see you later." Elizabeth Ann said quickly, "I've got dibs on the front bedroom." The children charged into the house. They raced into the wide hall and up a flight of wax stairs. Elizabeth Ann was the first to the top, and she took the larger room to the left. Jimmy followed Paul into one on the right, and he dumped his things on the bed and went to the window. Down below, he saw Hiram on the beach path. Beside him, Jimmy saw a gleam of black. "Blackie!" he yelled. He leaped across the bed and charged across the room. A minute later, the front door slammed behind him, and he was running down the path to the beach. And that is it for chapter 1. So, in your packet, today you're going to do the page that's titled, Who Is It? And it's all based on the characters we've talked about so far in chapter 1. You're going to use some of them more than once. And if you need to go back and listen to my video, you are more than welcome to. You're also going to do What's to See at the Sea. And this one has some pictures and a word bank as to what you think that they are. And some of them have more than one answer because you can't really tell exactly which fish it is. So it's okay if you're not 100% sure. And then you can go ahead and color this page as well if you would like to. Okay, so that's it for chapter 1. You're going to hang on to those pages until we are done with the story. So the next video will be for Wednesday, and that will be chapter 2. See you guys later.